I believe that there was once a long-lost global civilization. Everywhere in the world, civilizations have a flood myth, where humans were almost completely eradicated, a few survived, and they built the world back up. That's a pretty weird coincidence. But let's look at the Greenland ice core samples. 12,800 years before present time, there was a massive decline in temperature, and it increased even more rapidly 11,600 years before present. So what happened? Some researchers say it was an asteroid impact. Now, if an asteroid hits an ice sheet, what do you think would happen? In addition, there's a mass extinction event of animals. For example, mammoth or saber-toothed cats were eradicated, and the skeletons and remains of which were found completely broken all over Alaska and Russia. But still in ice, so in some places you could actually eat a mammoth steak 12,000 years since it died. That's kind of crazy. Besides the point though, our human species, the way we are today, exists for at least 300,000 years. And the mainstream belief is that we just chilled and were primitive for 290,000 years, then the Ice Age happened, and then we suddenly had the idea to go farming and build pyramids? And they can be found everywhere in the world too. And people say, yeah, it's the easiest shape to build. No. Let's take a look at the Great Pyramid. It actually has 8 sides and not 4. And it uses more stone than every chapel, church, or cathedral in England since the time of Christ. What? And no, it's not a tomb, and we don't know when it was built, how it was built, or why it was built. Besides pyramids, we find the same type of stonework everywhere in the world. It's earthquake-proof, it does not use any type of mortar, and we don't know how they build it. And why are the majority of the global ancient sites we find aligned to the stars? Religion, a concept that has also appeared everywhere in the world, really tells the same story, but it's just so old and got lost in translation. If a friend tells you a story and you retell that story, you already made changes. Now imagine a story that has been retold so many times. Of course there will be differences. 11,600 years before present, the end of the last ice age, also perfectly fits with Plato's account of the destruction of Atlantis, a concept that can also be found everywhere in the world. There's a lot more to say, but...
So this is a moment in history that happened, which you probably won't believe that it did. So back in the day, Roman Emperor and renowned mad lad Julius Caesar was once kidnapped by pirates who demanded 20 talents or 20 kilograms of gold for his release. However, with Caesar only having a small ego, he laughed in their faces and said that a man of his status should be worth at least 50 talents. So while the Romans were gathering the bounty for Caesar, he settled in for a period of captivity where he bossed the pirates around and shushed them when he wanted to sleep. He also forced the pirates to listen to poems and speeches he was writing in his spare time, and if the pirates were not adequately impressed by them, he called them illiterate and stupid. He joined in all of their games and exercises, acting as their commander, and being the legend that Jules is, he threatened to have every one of them crucified once he was released, but they didn't believe him because they thought he was a madman. However, this wasn't a joke though, as after 38 days of captivity, his bounty was paid, and Caesar started to raise an army, track down the pirates, and had them all crucified just as he said he would. He then stole back the 50 talents that was paid for his bounty. Absolute legend.
The body is frozen for all those years, there should be deterioration, but because the body was in an era that experienced freezing, then melting, it allowed for the perfect conditions of preservation without chemicals. So they named the man Ötzi since he was found in Ötztal Alps, and they do a radiocarbon analysis on his tissues, and they find out that Ötzi is older than 4,000 years old. He's 5,300 years old. That's 3,000 years before Jesus and 700 years before the Pyramid of Giza was constructed in Egypt. He is officially the oldest preserved human being ever found on Earth. This dates Ötzi back to the Copper Age, which is the transition between Neolithic or New Stone Age and the Late Bronze Age. This is the first time ever in history that we're seeing what a human being might have actually looked like from that time period. But this was just the beginning. It's not every day that you find a well-preserved human body from 5,300 years ago. These are the kinds of finds that provide us a snapshot in time into a world of our ancestors. Ötzi was so well preserved that he still had his eyeballs, lashes, tongue, skin, all his internal organs, etc. More analysis showed that Ötzi was about 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds. He also had incredibly preserved muscles. In fact, he was so fit that scientists said that his physical fitness was akin to a modern Olympian wrestler. A further analysis of his osteons, which are structures in your bone that help determine age, found that he was around 43 when he died. Although Ötzi was physically healthy, he had several ailments at the time of his death, including H. pylori, which is a bacteria in your gut, Lyme disease, and signs of arthritis in his joints. He's also genetically prone to arteriosclerosis, and through CT scans, they confirmed that Ötzi is the oldest known case of heart disease in the world.
Stop scrolling, you'll want to hear about this. 12,800 years ago, fragments of a comet hit Earth. The locations marked below are where the fragments hit. Now bear in mind that a giant ice sheet covered most of North America and Northern Europe, which these fragments hit. This would have caused a tremendous amount of flooding and something akin to a nuclear winter. The flooding was so severe that a 30-foot rise in sea levels happened in 24 hours. To put that into perspective, this is what Florida looks like with just a 10-foot rise in sea level. Cities like Miami would just disappear. So needless to say, this great flooding would have been detrimental to humans at the time. I believe that the thousands of flood myths from around the world are discussing this event. There are even myths that discuss the cold conditions after the impact. Stories where a god tells a person to go underground to avoid a great frost. The next big question is, what history are we missing? Are there lost civilizations that were erased from history due to this event? Well, that's what I go over in this channel, so be sure to like and follow if you're interested.
The Romans didn't have toilet paper, so what did they use? I learned this terrible fact, so now you have to too. Rome's bathhouses were free for everyone in the city, and they were considered the height of luxury. Well, at least for back then. But when it came to cleaning up, some expenses were spared. They used something called a xylospongium. It was a sponge on a stick. And this wasn't a one-time use kind of thing. These guys didn't understand germ theory. The communal poo stick was shared by everybody. I'm sure they cleaned it well between uses though, right? Of course not. They stuck it in a bucket of water. Go thank a plumber today.
Did you know the famous Library of Alexandria didn't actually burn to the ground? The so-called destruction was a fire started by Caesar's men in Alexandria Harbor, which spread to the rest of the city. But the fire only destroyed a small collection of works stored in the library. It remained in operation long after, and many of its works were still preserved, such as accurate astronomy with the sun in the middle, around Earth, and an accurate year, and technologies of the era, such as Greek fire, Roman concrete, and even a basic steam engine and simple computing. The true destruction was a slow decline of the popularity of the library alongside the decline of Egypt. We slowly abandoned and forgot what we used to know in favor of medieval Christianity and feudalism.
There's been many different resets and many different civilizations. The question is, how long has this been going on? And have we done all of this before?
Hello, my friend. Let's have a look.
Oh, ancient Sumerians depicting a helicopter?
But that wasn't from ancient Sumeria, that was from ancient Egypt. It's a result of a message being written over another message. Ramses II had it written over the message of Seti I. The layer between the two inscriptions eroded, causing the hieroglyphs to combine, creating a depiction of a helicopter. I've explained this before.
This guy in the 1800s seems to have some sort of holographic device.
So that was a trend from the late 1800s and early 1900s called spirit photography. Photographers would manipulate images to make it look like they're able to photograph ghosts. And they got very creative with how they did this. Think of it like early Photoshop.
Of course, found in Egypt in a pyramid was a light bulb along with a set of batteries.
So that was actually never found. What you're referring to is called the Dendera light. And the image you showed is actually a modern recreation of it, based off an interpretation of the motif that depicts it. But what it actually is like a snake coming out of a lotus. Here's it depicted again, but like without the bulb. You can see it's a snake coming out of a lotus. Here's another example of a snake coming out of a lotus. I think I've talked about this before. Anyways, good night. It's incredible how much we can learn just by looking at footprints. These footprints were found in White Sands National Park, New Mexico, and date back around 13,000 years. This individual walked close to a mile in one direction, but every so often, these smaller footprints would appear, implying that this individual was walking across the mud holding a child. And judging by the distance of the footprints, this individual was walking pretty fast. A potential reason is that she was being followed by a now extinct giant ground sloth. There's also evidence of a mammoth being quite close to them as well. Now, there are two sets of footprints from the same individual, heading in different directions. The first set has a child's footprints and the second set doesn't, meaning this individual reached their destination, dropped the child off, and then headed back. From mere footprints, we get a glimpse of humanity's past.
My favorite college lecture was on Roman water culture, which sounds really boring, but it's not. Other than maybe roadways or major military conquests, the harnessing and utilization of water in ancient Rome was, even by today's standards, really cool. And probably Rome's biggest achievement. Roman water was one of the first examples in human history where a government system actually benefited all levels of society from beggar to emperor. You had latrines, baths, dining spaces, fountains. Rome mastered the art of taking the natural and making it artificial, so a river 50 miles away could now be a fountain in a city. And Roman aqueducts like this bad boy were ridiculously simple. They didn't have pumps or any kind of mechanism other than gravity alone. The water simply traveled downstream from the source to the city, and most aqueducts ran underground, so Roman citizens didn't even see them. And the aqueducts that had to travel over large uninhabitable areas had these beautiful arches built like the Pont de Gard in France circa 16 BCE. This is a cute map of it. And when the water did get to the cities, they were stored in castellum aqua, which were water castles or water towers. And from these water castles, they would go to houses or streets, and this is where we see the overconsumption of water big time, because, fun fact, the city of Rome only needed one aqueduct to survive. They had 11. And the best part about overconsumption is that everybody has access to water now. A citizen would usually spend 30 minutes to 2 hours every day getting the daily water that they need from these public fountains or cisterns. And yeah, you can drink from them. And these public fountains actually did have valves on them to turn them on or off, but they were rarely turned off because you wanted them to overflow because that's how the streets were kept clean. That's just so neat to me. I don't know. Elite homes could even have their own private water system in their house. They would just have to go to council to get permission to run the lead pipes for fountains, gardening, toilets, cleaning, cooking. And once again, they have valves, so they can even turn their own water on and off with the distribution box. Especially once we're a few centuries into this water culture, fountains in a rich person's home are a must. Rich people always had their doors open, so that way you could look into their house and see how rich they are, and that's where they would place the fountain, right dead center in front of the door. And it's really funny because there are actual logs of neighbors going one after the other to the council to get permission for a fountain. So even in ancient times, there was friendly neighbor competition of keeping up with the Joneses. Romans had very strict and very boring water laws because they understood the importance of not polluting your own water, so water towers or castles were really sacred. This is really cool. So emperors and wealthy individuals even had water dining spaces, like water dining rooms. So it sort of looked like this. You dined on your left elbow laying down and water would just be below you. They even had special plates or trays that would float and carry your food. And it was actually really cool if you were wealthy enough to have a water dining space because you had to wash your feet before dining in ancient Rome. So to just walk through the water, that was washing your feet. Practical.